Great question. Great question. So it's about the authenticity and validity of this text, basically. Because
Yes.
if we feel a love towards Ramana, or if we look up to him as some kind of authority or guru, and then we're reading Who Am I? It's like, is this what he wrote, or is this what somebody else wrote? I want to know. Is this? And so it's a great question. That is a great, and that's exactly the way I think as well. By the way, when I'm reading these things, I'm not just saying, "Oh, Tom said Who Am I" is a great text. I'm like, well, let me just check. I always like to check for myself. I recommend you do the same. So many times I've heard this is the teaching of Ramana, and then you read it, you find out, and it's not the teaching of Ramana. This is the teaching of Vedanta. You read it, you find out it's not the teaching of Vedanta. Someone says this is the teaching of Buddha. You read it, you look into it, it's not the teaching of Buddha. You see why? It's because the ego is just trying to distort all the time, and many teachers, they will teach what their ego wants to, what is acceptable to their ego. So it's a great question. I love that question. For some of you might think, well, surely just accept it. But no, this is a great approach. This is a wonderful approach to be healthily doubting, healthily skeptical about the origin of these things. So the brief answer is that yes, this is Ramana's teaching. I'll explain to you why. So there are a few different reasons why. The simplest reason is that Ramana himself took so when it was recorded by this devotee, you're right, Ramana, he wasn't speaking at the time, so the teachings he wrote the teachings down, or indicated the answers somehow, like by writing it in the dirt or writing it on something. And then this devotee wrote the answers down in his notebook, and it just stayed there in his notebook. It wasn't published or anything. I think it stayed there for like 10 years, 15 years. So, which is a long time, right? I mean, some people might think, 10 years, 15 years is not a long time, but it's a good amount of time for such an important work not to be published or anything. And then it came to light that this devotee had this record of these questions and answers. And what Ramana did, maybe 20 years later or something, I wrote about it in my on tomdas.com, where you downloaded it from. I actually wrote about it in the introduction to Who Am I. I think I wrote it in there anyway. Let me know if I haven't. I kind of maybe update the page. Ramana actually took the text Who Am I and rewrote the entire thing without the questions. So he rewrote it into an essay. And that's why there are these two versions. This is why there's a question and answer version, which is kind of like the original one taken down by the devotee. And then there's an essay version, which is not the original. It's the second version, but that's the one that Ramana himself wrote. So that was written by his hand. And he wrote that out, and he recommended, and it's basically the same teaching. Ramana added an introductory paragraph that wasn't there in the original question and answer version. And he also took a couple of answers out that were there. But when you compare and contrast, it's really splitting hairs. There's not much difference, really. So if you want to be really authentic, you should read the essay version, because that's the version that Ramana wrote himself. But now what's happened is that since the essay version was written, some of the publishers tried to be very helpful, and they kind of fused the two together. So you've got now a third version, which is a question and answer version. But they've tried to take the answers from Ramana's essays and things like that. So, you can imagine this happening, in early 20th century India, in the ashram, where you've got all these devotees trying to be very helpful. So I think you end up with like a 5 or 6 different versions of Who Am I, And if you go to the ashram library, apparently you can see these different versions. They're all subtly different. But when you look at them all, and I've found a few of them, and I've gone through them all myself, they're all pretty much the same. There's no meaningful difference.
Okay.
So that's basically the answer. The other thing is that when you see the talks with Ramana, he often recommended people read this text. And several times he says the entire teaching is in this text. In fact, there's this dialogue in Talks with Sri Ramana, the book Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, which captures some of the conversations he's had with various people. And one person says to him, I've read Who Am I? I don't understand the teaching. And Ramana says, the teaching is in Who Am I? And then the questioner says, but I still don't understand it. And Ramana says, it's given in Who Am I? And then the questioner goes, I don't understand what the teaching's saying. And then the Ramana goes, it's in Who Am I? So I don't know what was going on there. I don't know what dynamic was going on there. And I think then he asked another question and Ramana didn't say anything. He wasn't always forthcoming, His teachings are in Who Am I?
Yeah.
It's given.
Yeah, don't make me repeat myself.
Yeah, how dare you? No. Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's given in Who Am I? It's there.
Oh, well, that helps, because the fact that he then, he put them in the, I'll check the essay form, but the fact that he did come back and say, yes, these are my teachings, because I wasn't sure whether this guy had just gone off and written them and said, yeah, here are the teachings.
Exactly. The other thing to think about is these devotees, you've got to think about the kind of person who that point in time would have gone to Ramana. Ramana wasn't famous when he gave his teachings. He was something like 20 years old, 19 or 20 years old. In fact, I think on the page on my website where I've put the teachings, I've got a picture of him, I think. And you'll see just how young he is. He's just a boy. He looked like he was about 13. He was about 19 or 20 when he wrote these teachings. And this is a devotee who sort of went to this boy and felt a love and connection. There you go. Who's that? William has put a picture of Ramana there. Can you see that? That's what he roughly would have looked like when he wrote Who Am I? So you've got to think the devotee went to this boy and asked, and he was an adult. The devotee was an adult. And so he's talking to somebody younger than him. He must have felt profound connection, profound love. And to receive these teachings, there's no, there'll be an authenticity in his reports you'll trust as well, I would think. Again, you can't be certain, but you would think that from he would have tried to be as authentic as he could be in recording the teachings down accurately. Now, then the question could always occur, well, maybe he was trying his best, but he just got it wrong. The devotee who might have been trying his best to record the teachings, we just got it wrong. But then he put it in front of Ramana. Ramana checked it. Ramana then rewrote the whole thing himself. If you also compare it with Ramana's other teachings, it's totally consistent. It's not like there's something in Who Am I that's wildly different from everything else Ramana wrote or Ramana said. No, it's all consistent.
Yes.
And then if you also compare it with the traditional Vedanta teachings, the Upanishads, Shankara's teaching, again, it's all completely consistent. There's nothing you'll find in Who Am I that you will not find in the Vedanta teachings. It's all there. Not something that's often taught. It's because I think in a similar way to you, Rebecca, in the sense that I want to verify, is this the correct teaching? So I did all this research myself. I read the texts. I didn't take what the teachers told me to be true. A lot, as I say often in this meeting, what you hear of as being Ramana's teachings, what you hear of as being Vedanta teachings is not the teachings often. I'm sure there are people who are sharing it correctly as well, but most of the more famous ones I've come across, then it's not an accurate representation of a teaching. I'm not saying that with any arrogance at all. It's just, you just read it. You can see it. You can read it. It says something different.